Did you know that the game of baseball as we know it today was significantly shaped by a man named Doc Adams in the mid-1800s? He wasn't just a player, but was a pioneer who helped craft the foundation of the modern game. John Thorn, the official historian of Major League Baseball, said, "He is baseball's most important figure not in the Hall of Fame. With the recent discovery of his laws of baseball, we have tangible primary evidence of his genius. More than anyone else, he created our game of 9 innings, 9 men, and 90-foot base paths." I'd like to introduce you to Daniel Lucius Doc Adams.
Daniel Lucius Doc Adams was born on November 1st, 1814 in Mount Vernon, New Hampshire. His father, Dr. Daniel Adams, was born in Townsend, Massachusetts, and graduated Phi Beta Kappa from Dartmouth College in 1797 and from the second class of Dartmouth Medical School in 1799. As well as being a practicing physician, he was a farmer, an author of widely used arithmetic and geography textbooks, a deacon of his congregational church, a choir master, a member of the New Hampshire legislature, president of the New Hampshire Medical Society, and an early and frequent orator in support of temperance and abolition. In 1800, he married Nancy Mulligan, the daughter of Isaac Mulligan, a physician who served as a surgeon with the Continental Army in 1775. In 1813, Daniel and Nancy moved to Mount Vernon and would live there until 1845, when they retired to Keene, New Hampshire. Doc's older brother Darwin was born in 1801, followed by two girls, one of which died in infancy and the other died at age 10 when Doc was 6. Doc was born in 1814, followed by his sister Nancy in 1821. It is not known where Doc received his earliest schooling, but by 1827, at age 12, he was enrolled and boarded at the Kimball Union Academy in Meredith, New Hampshire. By late 1828 or early 29, he was attending the Mount Pleasant Classical Institute in Amherst, Massachusetts. Among the numerous letters in his family's collection of papers, only one references sports of any kind. In a letter written to Doc by his sister Nancy in 1832, Doc was at Amherst at the time, and it was at Amherst that he first developed an interest in baseball. Doc left his bat and ball with his sister Nancy for her to play with while he was away at school. However, she told him she hadn't because she had been unable to find it. This letter shows that at an early age, Doc had an interest in bat and ball games. And of course, there were many variations in New England at the time. So we're really not sure specifically what sort of bat and ball game he was actually playing. In 1830, Doc enrolled in Amherst College. It was at Mount Pleasant and Amherst that Doc made the acquaintance of Henry Ward Beecher, with whom, in later years, according to oft-repeated family stories, he played flute duets in New York City. Henry Ward Beecher, the brother of Harriet Beecher Stowe, would become a famous abolitionist. Doc was at Amherst for 2 years, but he wasn't happy there, so he transferred to Yale College in 1833 and graduated from there in 1835. Later that year, Doc entered Harvard Medical School, where he graduated in 1838. It was at Harvard that Doc made the acquaintance of Oliver Wendell Holmes Sr., when they roomed at the same boarding house. In 1839, Doc earned his nickname, becoming a vaccine physician for the city of New York at a salary of $400 a year. He then started his own medical practice while also volunteering as an attending physician to the New York Dispensary for the Poor. As an attending physician at the New York Infirmary, Doc was often called upon to treat those suffering from the various cholera epidemics. The only letter from Doc from this time period discusses a cholera epidemic and how the district attorney had died the previous week. And the letter was written in the middle of a typical New England heat wave with temperatures of 95 to 100 degrees. This letter from Doc's father to Doc in March of 1845 raises some interesting what-ifs. It's obvious from the letter that Doc was offered some sort of position in Springfield, Massachusetts. It's not known what sort of job he was offered because the letters leading up to it are missing. But it is clear that a move out of New York was contemplated, and his father approved his decision to stay in New York with his own practice. This letter is interesting because later that year, just about 7 months later, Doc would join the fledgling Knickerbocker Baseball Club a month after they formally organized in September. One could only wonder what would have happened had Doc relocated to Springfield. What might the impact have been on the Knickerbocker Baseball Club, the New York game, the National Association of Baseball Players? Might Doc have become a champion of the Massachusetts game? Thank goodness we'll never know. Doc began to play a form of baseball with the New York Baseball Club in about 1840. He later joined the Knickerbockers about a month after they were formally founded. The club was playing ball in Manhattan at Madison Square and Murray Hill. With the coming of the railroad, the club knew they would soon have to leave Manhattan, so they moved their games to the Elysian Fields in Hoboken, New Jersey. Doc played in their first official match game in Hoboken on June 19, 1846. This is the scorecard from that game. He made 3 outs. Note at the top right of the New York Club page that a player named Davis was fined 6 cents for swearing. This underscores characterizations of early baseball as a gentleman's game. It was men getting together for fun and exercise. When the Knickerbockers were founded in 1845, they wrote down their rules. There were 17 of them. The bases were 42 paces from home to second and first to third, and it was 15 paces from the pitcher's base to home. There were 7 rules that dictated how the club members were to behave because this was very much a gentleman's club. Pitching was underhanded with the ball being fed to the batter. There were no gloves and no cleats. There was no official uniform. They wore whatever they were wearing as they crossed the Hudson on the ferry as they came from Manhattan to the Elysian Fields. This is the only known first-hand account of Doc's memories of the game. It is portions of an interview that appeared in several newspapers across the Midwest, apparently originating in the Chicago Chronicle on June 23, 1895. In February of 1896, the entire interview was published in the Sporting News. The early years were the most challenging for the club. After they played the game with the New York club in June of 1846, there is not a record of a game with another club for 5 years, and therefore it must have been very difficult to keep the enthusiasm going. Doc said during these first 6 or 7 years, baseball had a desperate struggle for existence, and he described it as the pursuit of pleasure under difficulties. In 1846, Doc was elected vice president of the Knickerbockers, embarking on his leadership journey. The following year, he was elected president of the club, a position he would hold for 6 times over 17 years. Because he often would make the effort to get to the Elysian Fields, and there would only be 2 or 3 other men there, it was very discouraging. And so Doc was the one who at all the club meetings and all the club dinners had to employ all his rhetoric to induce attendance. And he often thought it useless to continue the effort, but his love for the game led him to persevere. This is one of my favorite quotes. It illustrates Doc's love of the game and his joy in playing it. Once there, we were free of all restraint, and throwing off our coats, we played until it was too dark to see any longer. This sentiment resonates with everyone who ever fell in love playing the game. Doc had a hand in standardizing equipment through the improvement and manufacturing of baseballs and overseeing bat production by New York City woodworkers who were not familiar with the sport. Back in New York in the 1840s, nobody was producing balls and bats commercially. Doc made all the balls for the club from about 1846 up until about 1861. For 6 or 7 years, I made all the balls myself, not only for our club, but also for other clubs. A saddler in lower Manhattan showed him how to wind the yarn around a core of rubber cuttings. I used to make the stuffing out of 3 or 4 ounces of rubber cuttings, wound with yarn, and then covered with leather. He also had to get someone to make the bats, so he went to the various furniture turners in Manhattan. He would select the wood and then supervise the turning of the bats until it got to the right length and taper. You really can't overestimate how important this was, because if Doc had not made the effort to see that the bats and balls were provided for the club, they couldn't have played, no matter how many players showed up. As mentioned earlier, Doc was first elected Knickerbocker president on April 3, 1847. He also served as president in 1848, 49, 56, 57, and 61, and as a director in the other years he was a member. By 1848, the Knickerbockers were still playing only amongst themselves. However, they were playing enough games that there were some on-field disagreements about their own rules. So in 1848, the club formed a committee chaired by Doc to revise the rules and bylaws. The following year, 1849, Doc created and developed the shortstop position. The ball could be hit quite a distance, however, it couldn't be thrown very far. So Doc moved one of the outfield positions closer to act as a relay from the outfield to the infield. Over the course of his Knickerbocker playing career, Doc played every position except pitcher. However, according to his son Roger Cook Adams, shortstop was Doc's favorite position. Here are some box scores for games that Doc played in that were printed in New York newspapers in the mid-1850s. Beyond the field, Doc demonstrated outstanding organizational skills with the influential Knickerbocker Baseball Club, serving as a 6-term president, vice president, director, and head of the committee to revise their constitution and bylaws. By 1854, 2 other clubs, the Eagles and the Gothams, along with the Knickerbockers, were playing lots of games against each other. But the clubs had their own variations of rules of play.
So a meeting was proposed for the three clubs to get together and agree on a common set of rules by which they would play. Doc, as president of the Knickerbockers, was one of the delegates to that meeting. By 1856, there were 16 clubs playing in Manhattan, and in addition, there were about a dozen other brand new clubs in the formulative stage. At the Knickerbocker Club meeting in December of 1856, Doc proposed that there be a general meeting of the 16 baseball clubs to once again standardize the rules of the game. So a meeting was called with all the clubs, and Doc was elected the president of this first baseball convention. As president of the convention and of the Knickerbockers, the most senior influential club in New York at the time, Doc developed a draft of the rules to present to the convention. His laws of baseball were delivered to the convention, discussed, revised, and in the main adopted. His influence and leadership extended to the National Association of Baseball Players, where he chaired their Rules and Regulations Committee from its inception until his retirement. In 2016, just a few short months after Doc Adams fell 2 votes short of election to the Hall of Fame, his handwritten 1857 laws of baseball were rediscovered. Those handwritten laws had originally been sold in an online auction in 1998, along with a group of other non-baseball documents. Although the person who bought them loved baseball, he was really buying this other group of papers. After the purchase, they were squirreled away in a drawer where they remained for about 17 years. In 2015, when reviewing the records in that drawer, he finally realized what he had and decided to have them authenticated. In April of 2016, those documents sold at auction for $3.26 million, which at the time was the third highest paid for any sports memorabilia, and the second highest paid for any baseball memorabilia. Rediscovery of this artifact substantiates Doc's 1895 interview, where he said he presented the first draft of rules, prepared after much careful study of the matter, and in the main it was adopted. These are the 3 surviving pages of Doc's 1857 draft of the laws of baseball. These laws established for the first time the fundamental rules of 90-foot base paths, 9-inning games, and 9 men to a side. Up until that point, the game was played to 21 aces or runs, and pretty much whoever showed up got to play. There was neither a minimum nor a maximum number of players on a side. The distance between the bases I fixed at 30 yards. The only previous determination of distance being the bases shall be from home to second 42 paces, from first to third base 42 paces, equidistant, which was rather vague. Pulitzer Prize-winning sports columnist Red Smith once said, 90 feet between home plate and first base may be the closest man has ever come to perfection. The laws clearly defined the pitcher's position and distance from home plate for the first time. It also was the first time that revolving, or jumping from team to team, was outlawed. Uniform standards for the size of the bat and the size of the ball were defined. Wagering by anyone involved in the game being played was prohibited. In 1858, the formal name of the National Association of Baseball Players was adopted. From that year until his retirement, Doc would serve as the chairman of the Rules Committee for this organization. The fly rule was very near and dear to Doc's heart, and he passionately advocated for its adoption at every opportunity.
Per the existing rules, a ball caught in fair territory, either on the fly or on the first bounce, was counted as an out. However, Doc thought the game would be more manly if only balls caught in the air were recorded as outs, and he spoke on this subject at every single meeting of the National Association of Baseball Players until he retired from the game. The rule finally did pass in 1864. One of the reasons that there was such opposition to it was that there were no gloves and there were so many young clubs and inexperienced players that didn't know how to catch the ball properly. This led to a greater risk for hand injuries with the fly game. To summarize thoughts on the laws of baseball, John Thorn said, "Now, with the rediscovery of his laws of baseball, drafted for presentation to the Knickerbocker Baseball Club, and thence to the floor of the 1857 convention, we have tangible primary evidence of his genius. Somebody asked me today how many votes I thought Adams might get when he comes up for election at the Hall of Fame, because out of 16, he got 10 last time. 12 is necessary for election. I said I thought it would be 16, because what you have here is incontrovertible proof of Adams's genius." The first All-Star Series was played in 1858 between the best players from New York and Brooklyn. It was a series of 3 games. They played at a site in Brooklyn called the Fashion Racecourse. It was the first time that baseball was played in an enclosed space and the first time that admission was charged. As many as 10,000 spectators were in attendance. Doc did not play in any of the games. Baseball had come a long way since 1846. Although Doc did not play in any of the Fashion Racecourse games, he still had a very important role. He was the umpire for the third and deciding game of the match held on September 10th, 1858. To be selected as the umpire for this game reflected the high esteem in which Doc was held. The actual game ball from this match is on display in the National Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown. The next day, the New York Times provided prime coverage of the game on its front page. In the vernacular of the day, it was summed up as a glorious victory for New York. It be a conquering game of a home-and-home match. This is the earliest known verified photograph of the Knickerbocker Baseball Club. On August 2nd, 1859, the Knickerbockers played against the Excelsiors, and Doc is fourth from the left. He played third base in the game and made 3 outs. The Excelsiors defeated the Knickerbockers by a score of 20-5. In March of 1862, President Doc Adams communicated via a letter to the Knickerbockers that he was resigning from the club. His message came as a bit of a surprise to the team, as it didn't appear that he had previously given them any indication that he was considering resigning. Doc had gotten married the previous year. He was 47 and Cornelia, his wife, was 33. Family letters revealed that by March of 1862, Cornelia was expecting their first child. It seems that Doc decided to prioritize his family as a husband and father over the game of baseball, no matter how much he loved the game. In a letter to Doc in response to his letter of resignation, James White Davis, the club secretary, wrote, "I indulge the hope that the spirit you express of being with us always may be accompanied by the body on the old playgrounds." He closed the letter with the postscript, "Playing commences on the 21st," as if to say, if you change your mind, please join us. When Doc resigned from the Knickerbockers, they made him an honorary member and proclaimed him the Nestor of ball players. In case your ancient Greek history is a little rusty, Nestor was a legendary king of Pylos who advised the Greeks at the Battle of Troy, so the word has come to mean a wise advisor or counselor. Resolved that by the resignation of Dr. D.L. Adams, the Knickerbocker Baseball Club has lost one of its most honored members, one who for a period of 16 years, in the performance of every duty, whether at the bat or in the field, as our presiding officer or representative in our National Association of Baseball Players, or in the daily walks of life, has ever been faithful and uniformly proved himself the courteous, high-minded gentleman and the zealous advocate of our noble game. Resolved that with unfeigned regret we yield to the imperative necessity that compels his withdrawal from the roll of our active members, and beg to assure him that in leaving us he carries with him our heartfelt wishes for his welfare, happiness, and prosperity, and we cherish the hope often to be the recipients of the benefit of his good counsel and long experience. As stated previously, Doc married Cornelia Ann Cook in 1861, and in an 1881 alumni publication for Yale, Doc wrote, "My marriage was the crowning achievement of my life." This brief autobiography that Doc wrote makes no mention of baseball. Cornelia lost the child she was expecting about 6 weeks after Doc resigned from the Knickerbockers. Her health was so precarious that she really did not recover from this miscarriage till about September. Based on family letters, they had another child a few years later who would pass away within about a month. And that's the reason that they moved to Ridgefield, Connecticut in 1865. It was for Cornelia's health, because they wanted to start a family. Roger Cook Adams explained the reason for the move to Ridgefield. This move was largely dictated by the belief that Ridgefield's high altitude, 1,000 feet, would be beneficial to my mother's health. From 1865 to 1888, Doc was a prominent citizen of Ridgefield, Connecticut. He was one of the founding members of the Ridgefield Library and its first treasurer. He was active with the Land Improvement Association, and in 1870 served one term in the Connecticut State Legislature. In 1871, Doc became the first president of the Ridgefield Savings Bank, which is today the Fairfield County Bank. He would serve as president for 10 of the next 15 years. And for those of you who go there, his photograph still hangs in the building, although you will need to be escorted to a non-public area to see it. In 2016, the bank produced an image in their annual report of a Visa debit card that featured Doc's name on it. In 1875, Doc received a letter from his friend and former teammate James White Davis announcing a reunion game that was going to be held in Hoboken. In the letter, he expressed the hope that Doc would be able to attend. Although Doc was 60 years old at the time, he did not miss the opportunity to participate. The game was held at the Elysian Fields and pitted Doc and his former teammates, the old veterans of 1855, against the youngsters of 1865. By the time the fifth inning was ended and the sun had sunk and the damps of the evening began to settle, and poor old Davis stopped the game and called out, Come on, get out of here, you old fellows. Let the youngsters finish the game. It's getting cold, and I ain't gonna have you say you got sick on my account. And with that, he hustled them into carriages and took them down to the Duke's, where they waited everyone else who finished the game. After the game, they all gathered at the tavern for dinner, and a good social time was had. Oh, and the score? The youngsters whitewashed the veterans 21-0. Doc left Ridgefield in 1888, and his family moved to New Haven. His two sons were at Yale, and it was very costly. By moving to New Haven and having the boys living at home, not only did it save the family money, but Doc was able to keep an eye on his sons to make sure that they were studying hard enough. Doc's son, Roger Cook Adams, wrote about his father's continued lifelong love of baseball. Till the end of his life, he would play with his sons in the backyard and astonish all the boys with his batting, while continuing to make baseballs for his sons. Another quote from Doc's autobiography that he did for Yale College tells you a great deal about the man. He didn't consider himself to be any big deal. The current of my life has been very quiet and uniform, neither distinguished by any great successes or disturbed by serious reverses. I have been content to consider myself one of the ordinary, everyday workers of the world, with no ambition to fill its high positions, and have no reason to complain of the results of my labor. Life has passed very pleasantly in the midst of a thoroughly united and happy domestic circle. However, when you consider what he accomplished in his life, he indeed was a very big deal. Doc Adams died on January 3rd, 1899. This is one of his obituaries, and it does mention his interest in athletics and in baseball. He became president of the club and took the most active interest in its welfare and development of the game. It also mentions his keen interest in music and those flute duets with Henry Ward Beecher. John Thorn, who rediscovered Doc Adams and detailed his contributions and accomplishments, states the facts. He refers to Doc as baseball's most important figure not in the Hall of Fame. And more than anyone else, he created our game of 9 innings, 9 men, and 90-foot base paths. Although we want to see Doc Adams recognized with enshrinement in the National Baseball Hall of Fame, our mission has and continues to be to raise awareness of this overlooked baseball pioneer's contributions and accomplishments. We are not creating a narrative, but rather bringing the research of highly regarded baseball historians, writers, and authors, including the official historian of Major League Baseball, to a broader audience. As more people become aware of Adams and his contributions, instead of asking, should Doc Adams be in the Hall of Fame? They are asking, how is it possible that Doc Adams is not already in the Hall of Fame? Doc Adams isn't just a historical footnote. He's woven into the fabric of baseball's DNA. His legacy lives on in every pitch, every stolen base, and every double play turned. Many baseball historians, writers, authors, and fans believe it's essential that pioneers like Adams are recognized and honored. However, Doc Adams is not yet a member of the National Baseball Hall of Fame. It's time to recognize his contributions officially with a place in the hallowed halls of Cooperstown. Adams' induction would not only honor his legacy, but also fill a gap in the Hall's roster. It would be a fitting tribute to a man who dedicated himself to helping develop and nurture the sport we all cherish. As John Thorn said, the Hall of Fame knows about this story. They know that Adams is going to be a member of the Hall of Fame at some point. Share with your friends. Help us spread the word. for the love of the game.